Well, welcome everybody. I'm Samantha Bateman with Integria Consulting, and I'm thrilled to have Mike James Ross here with Juniper. Thanks so much for being here today, Mike. It's great to see you.
My goodness, Samantha, thank you for having me. What a great opportunity.
Oh my gosh. Well, we have a lot to cover today. So for those of you who might not know Mike, actually, Mike, you and I, the first time we connected was when you were VP of HR at Simons. So that's going back a little bit. Since then, so I'm going to plug your book here. You've written this great book called Intention.
Thanks.
And The Surprising Psychology of High Performers with...
and we sold at least one copy.
At least one. You're doing very, very well.
My co-authors are going to be very happy to see that. Yeah.
This is awesome. So anybody who wants to, pick up this book, you can do so pretty much everywhere, Amazon, Indigo, et cetera, et cetera. So Mike, I'm really curious. Do you want to kind of share with our audience, how did you get here to this point of writing a book, of having been a VP for, one of Canada's iconic retailers? Talk to us about your path to getting to this point, because I know early on you had a little bit of a wild ride, right?
Yeah. Did a bunch of different stuff. Let me see if I can't synthesize it down. I had lunch with a friend of mine the other day, and this woman I had just met, and she said, "Oh, tell me the story of your life." And I said, No. I'd really rather not do that. No, I insist. And then after about 3 hours, she's like, "Look, I really got to go."
I'm sure that's
things I got to do. I don't know. I can't just sit here all day listening to you. So let's try to keep it short and sweet. There's a Steve Jobs quote from when he did a commencement speech at Stanford. Probably most of the people watching have seen it. If you haven't, look it up, right? Steve Jobs commencement speech, Stanford. It's a really great speech. And in there somewhere, he talks about the fact that at some point he learned calligraphy, he took a course on calligraphy. And that course informed the way that they did fonts on the Mac and an Apple. And had he not taken that course, the sort of use of really good fonts and really good typefaces probably wouldn't have happened when it happened or whatever. And he said, there's no way that I could have known when I was doing that course that it would have that impact in the future. And I think that's a really good kind of metaphor, I think, for a lot of life. And certainly my life is, you connect the dots looking backwards. And so when I look back over my life, I think there's two big things that I can highlight. One is I've done a lot of different stuff. And I won't bore everybody with the long stories, but lawyer, private equity, management consulting, HR, obviously. And then before that, all sorts of other service jobs, bartender, paperboy, like all sorts of things. But throughout all of that, as we say in French, the fil conducteur, the kind of the connecting thread is people, and is actually caring about people and caring about people's development. Individuals, right? People that I'm close to and that I help at an individual basis, but also sort of structurally, how do we help organizations care for the people that work for them, and help them? And actually, there's a phraseology that I've used a lot, which is this notion of realize their potential. And I'll just end just with a quick thing on that. To me, realize in English at least has two big meanings. Realize, to discover, right? Oh my gosh, I have all this potential. And then realize is to manifest, to bring to bear, to actually live with. And that's the stuff that I find super exciting, and what I've tried in my life and all these different roles that I've had to do as much of as possible.
I love that. So what inspired you then to write this book? And how long were you thinking about writing the book before? Talk to us a little bit about that.
It's funny because there's writing a book and there's writing this book. I think that for me, for many, many years, I had ideas. I'm sure that everybody listening and having looked at some of the list of some of the people attending, I know that some of you have actually written your own books, right? So for many years, I had this thought that I had ideas that I wanted to share more in a structured way than just posting on LinkedIn, which I probably do too much of anyway. So there was these kind of ideas kicking around. And then I wrote the book with two co-authors, Sakul and Dan, who run an amazing behavioral science consulting firm here in Montreal called The Decision Lab. And they were actually approached by a publisher. Wiley said to them, "Look, we love the stuff you're doing, and we think it's really exciting, and we'd like to help you bring it to a broader audience." And then they came to me and they said, "Hey, Mike, we love what you're doing," because I've been coaching them and helping them for many years. "Could you help us craft a message that both encapsulates the very science focused, right? Sekul has a PhD in neuroscience. They come at this from a very kind of scientific, evidence-backed approach. And then I guess I'm probably a little bit more philosophical, right? So I kind of have these ideas around what it means to work and act and live in meaningful ways from a more of a philosophy background. And so in the book, we tried to smush those two together to, I don't know, I guess it's up to you all to judge whether we were successful.
Amazing. So I'm curious, let's talk about intention then, right? So what role does intention play in the success of high performers?
Yeah, I start with perhaps a little bit of a kind of vocabulary disclaimer.
Mm-hmm.
Because the success of high performers, I think, means a lot of different things to different people.
It's true.
When we think of, and we talk about this in the book, when we think of high performance is overcoming your own personal obstacles in a way, in the sense that, Michael Phelps has this amazing, they call wingspan, right? He has the Michael Phelps, the Olympic swimmer, incredible arm reach. I think that like his toes actually have a little bit more skin between them. He almost has webbed feet, but not really, but a little bit more, like big, huge feet. Like, he was born to be an amazing swimmer. Now, he took that original context and made it incredible and became one of the best swimmers that's ever lived. But high performer is not, I'm going to be Michael Phelps. High performer could be that I am absolutely terrified of water. Like I'm frozen when I get anywhere near a lake, an ocean, even a swimming pool. And I managed to, through years of work on myself and things like that, actually manage to get into a swimming pool. That's high performance. And it's not as much as, or whatever, I wouldn't compare it to Michael Phelps, but I would say that for you as an individual, being able to do that thing that you find really hard, that's high performance. And so just I guess the first kind of vocabulary point for me is that a high performer is not someone who does something that all of us look at and say, wow, they won a bunch of prizes, they made a lot of money, whatever it is. A high performer is someone who does hard things. And hard is a subjective term. What's hard for me probably isn't hard for you, and vice versa.
Do you think that goes hand in hand with having a learning mindset? Do you think having a learning mindset is important for high performance?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that the doing hard stuff requires you to think about how you're going to do that hard stuff, right? I don't know anybody who's been successful. And then my second vocabulary point is this notion of success. What does it mean to have success? I think it is to succeed, to achieve those hard things that you're trying to do. And I don't know anybody who's had any measure of success without having a curiosity and a humility. And we talk about both of those things very much in the book, but a curiosity and a humility around what's happening in the world and how the world works, right? There's a very important component to that. So I would say, yes, I think that the learning mindset is a really crucial thing, but the crux of the book is really this notion of intention, right? One of the possible titles, as you write a book, you have all these ideas of titles and things like this. And one of the possible titles of the book was Choose to Choose. And what I mean by that is that many of us, and it's not a binary thing, you're not either living with intention or not, but in a large part of our life, we're just kind of doing stuff, right? We're just going through the motions of life, really, at a very micro scale, right? I wake up, I brush my teeth, I do all these things. Like there's a lot of activity or habit or ritual that I do that I don't really think about, but also at a very macro scale, right? I was a lawyer for a while. There are people in my law school who were lawyers because their parents were lawyers and their parents told them, you should go be a lawyer, right? And I think a lot of us are living lives that were told to us, not in necessarily as explicit a way, but we were guided towards through society, through our own understandings of what success could be, all those things. And so a part of intention is making choices around how and what you do.
I'm thinking about, that quote that there's no hunger in paradise. And
I've heard that before. I love it. There's no hunger in paradise.
There's no hunger in paradise. And so I think when people are comfortable
Mhm.
right? We've got all this free time now. We can be, scrolling on our phones. We could be, watching Netflix. We've got all
Yeah.
this downtime. We've got, hybrid and remote work. We've got, right? Life has gotten easier for many people,
Yeah.
not all people. And when I think about, some people that I know who have even come to this country,
Mhm.
first generation immigrants, um, that wasn't an option to not be intentional around certain aspects of their life. Like they
Absolutely.
had to start work as soon as possible at
Fighting to survive.
14
Yep.
years old, right? They had to, go to Kumon and learn, better math skills
Mhm.
faster. And they, this push, this urge, this, you have to do better. And so, I mean, what's your thought around that, around this idea of intention, not living a life of intention when we're comfortable, maybe? I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing this at you, but it's something that's come to my mind, right?
Well, it's really interesting, right? Because as you say, the conditions of life for many people, have never been better
Mm,
in terms of the quality of healthcare. And I know, there's
right,
challenges obviously in the
right.
delivery of healthcare, but the quality of the science of healthcare has never been stronger than it is now.
Mhm.
Um, the psychology, our support networks, our understanding of what's necessary to live a good life, all those things. And yet, for a lot of people who otherwise have the trappings of an external concept of success, they've never been more unhappy,
And
right?
more
Anxiety
unhealthy.
rates, loneliness rates, all these
Right.
things are occurring.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't know the research on this particularly, but I don't think you can separate those two things.
Mm.
My work now, I spend a lot of time. My work is on work. I think about work and what it means to work, and I know that we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But I was reading this. The guy named David Graeber wrote a really interesting book called Bullshit Jobs. Apologies for swearing. And one of the things he says in that book is never have we looked to our work more to give us meaning as a society, right? We really, because church, we don't really look to that to give us meaning. Our hobbies, our bridge club, the bowling alley, whatever it is, wherever we used to have these kind of sets of meaning or connectivity, a lot of that has drifted away. And so now work is really the one main locus, the main source of meaning for a lot of people. And yet, never have people been more unhappy in their work. And that to me is such a fascinating, interesting, wonderfully complicated, and so sad a point. And that's where I'm really trying to think about and focus. And I think intention speaks to that.
It's interesting because, a lot of times when we're working with organizations that have to replace people managers with
Mhm.
leaders, it's about how are we going to engage our workforce and
Mhm.
how do we demystify the numbers and get them to understand what's behind the KPIs so that they
Mhm.
can feel more connected to their work.
Mhm.
Right? So I definitely see that. You use the term cultivating meaning.
Mhm.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit
Sure.
in terms of
Sure. Yeah. I
how
mean,
to see that at work?
I can elaborate on that a lot. So
A lot.
you cut me off. So as I said, like the thing that I'm thinking about a lot these days is meaning, and of in at work. And we could talk about the distinction between those things. But often when people think about meaningful work, they use this vocabulary of finding meaning. I'm going to find meaning. And for me, the challenge of that is that it's as if it's some sort of discovery. I'm going to be walking along the street and I'm just going to stumble over meaning. And oh my gosh, hey, look, I found meaning. Look at me, lucky me. Uh, and I don't actually buy that. And a lot of the research that I've looked at actually shows that that's not really how it works. The next kind of vocabulary, I'm sorry I'm being so vocabulary focused, but the way you think and the way you talk about this stuff is really important. The next piece of that, a lot of people say, okay, I can create meaning. And that's as if I'm in something where I have this magic wand and boof, I'm going to make meaning happen. Again, that's unsatisfying to me. And so the word that I'm really enjoying now in this context is this notion of cultivating, in the sense of, if we think about a kind of a gardening metaphor, right? We live in Montreal. I can't grow a mango tree in my front yard. It's just not going to work.
Right.
So there's a certain context that I live in of wealth or education or access to opportunities or things like that. That context is sort of the earth, how fertile it is, the amount of sun, all these kind of things. I'm going to keep working this metaphor until it falls apart.
Okay.
So within the context that I have, I can actually grow things. I can grow certain plants, and there's certain plants that are easy to grow and some that are harder. But the act of growing that plant is to look at it and think about it and understand what it needs and how it is I can help it to grow. And so in the context of meaning of in at work, I can purposefully, intentionally, to use the term perhaps too much, I can intentionally create an environment where there's more likely to be more meaning for me. And by making real choices in how I address the things I do and how I engage with the people at my work and how I think about what I do, I could actually have more meaning, even in the exact same context that I'm in right now. I don't necessarily have to go off and be, I don't know, to cure cancer or be a vet, or, you think about jobs. There's a very famous academic paper on zookeepers, right? There's people who work in zoos. Oh my God, they're like, this is it. This is my calling. I don't necessarily have to discover a calling to create more meaning in the things that I do in the context of work.
So then what's the difference to you between meaning in and at work?
Yeah. And I'm going to add another one and then we'll talk about it for a second, then we'll dismiss it. So meaning of work, right? So in work meaning literature, people often talk about meaning of work, and meaning of work is this kind of very high level societal concept of equality and fair pay and things like that. So it's the sort of meaning of humans working. And I'm actually just going to grab a book because I got to give credit where credit is due. There's this book called Positive Organizational Scholarship. It's a really great book. It's a collection of essays. And there's an essay in it by two researchers out of the States, Michael Pratt and Blake Ashforth. And they talk in that about the distinction between meaning in work and meaning at work. And the distinction, simply put, is meaning in work is meaning in what I do, in the sense that I am a doctor. I am a HR professional, right? And I get meaning from the fact that I'm an HR professional. Meaning at work is meaning that's related to where I do it. So I work for, as you said, I used to work for Simons, which is an amazing organization, has a really interesting mission and vision, a set of values. It's a really beautiful place to work. And I got meaning both from the fact that I was doing HR, so helping people realize their potential in that context, but also from the place that I worked at Simons, because I believed in the mission of the organization. I believed in the values. I have an immense amount of respect for the CEO, for all the senior management team. All of those ingredients help to give me meaning. And so that distinction, I think, is very important. And especially for the folks who are listening, I know that there's a bunch of people from HR there, because often HR gets caught up in this, okay, but I can't create meaning for you. And that's totally true, but I can control certain levers that help you to gain those two parts of meaning. And by thinking about that, I can actually, so if I articulate our organization's values better, more clearly, that helps you to find meaning at work. Yeah. If I give you the opportunity to do different jobs, a kind of a bit of a rotational program, or learn more about your job, I'm helping you to build meaning in work. And so by separating those two, it actually makes it easier for me as an HR professional to think about, what is it that I can do? What are the things that I control as the person in HR that can help you cultivate that meaning for yourself?
I love that. I was just talking to somebody yesterday about an opportunity that we had. And I said, why are we having this conversation, right? Like, you just kind of landed where you are now. And he said, I'm always kind of open and, just kind of exploring. I said, well, in my experience, people are either running towards something or running away from something.
Oh, that's nice.
Right. So either you're running towards, having greater responsibilities at work. You want a bigger leadership role. You want more autonomy. You want, and that's one way that we can attract talent. Or you're running away from a toxic environment, values that are no longer, reflective of your own, a leader that you don't believe in, et cetera, et cetera. So, when you're talking about this, finding meaning in and at work, I see that also as a retention tool, quite honestly.
Absolutely. 100%. And I think obviously we know this very well, that people who have a sense of meaning are much more likely to stick around. Right.
Yeah.
And I think as an individual, part of the work is, and you're speaking to someone who's a consultant for many years, so I'm going to think in kind of frameworks, but you could almost draw yourself a 4-box diagram, which is meaning in work and meaning at work, and then towards and away. And you could say, okay, what are the things that I should be doing more of to get meaning in my work? And what are the things I should be doing more of to get meaning at my work? But also, what are the things I should be avoiding on each of those two things? So as an individual, I can do that. And this is cultivating, right? I'm trying to figure out, okay, what are the right fertilizer? What's the right sunlight for these things?
Mm-hmm.
But as an HR person in an organization, you can also think that for your organization and say, if we want to give people in our organization more meaning in their work, what are the things that we should be doing? And if we want to give them more meaning at their work, what are the things we should be doing? And then the inverse as well. So you're towards and away. I love that negative, positive kind of dichotomy.
Well, I find also leaders will sometimes underestimate how important the power of communication is.
Oh man,
to ask, like, what projects do you want to get involved in? Because I find even when people, I'd like to become a manager or, a director or VP, but my leader isn't going anywhere just yet. There's still opportunities to pull them into projects, to have them front and center, speaking to the board, to, there's so many different ways to provide, meaning.
Yeah.
So I do think that sometimes leaders, they're busy. They don't necessarily think it's a conversation that needs to be had unless their employee raises their hand. That's not always the case, right?
No, although I would say that, again, to tie this back to what we talk about in the book a lot, and the book is really geared towards individuals, but also people who lead people. So we try to do both at the same time. So we'll talk about how as an individual you apply this toolkit, and then we talk about how as a leader you'll apply the similar toolkit. And I think as individuals, it's also incumbent upon us to do the work to understand what it is that we want.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people will say, well, I want a promotion. And if you ask them, okay, but why? It's very hard for them to articulate why. They want a promotion because getting promotions is just what people do, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the way. I make more money, I get a better title, whatever it is. But if you're like, what is it about that next level that you're hoping to achieve? What is it about that next level that excites you? Often people don't have a very good answer to that question.
Right.
And if you can develop an answer to that question for yourself, it's a much more powerful conversation with your leader. Rather than saying, I want a promotion, you say, I'd like the opportunity to learn how to manage people better.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, we have an intern for the summer. Why don't you help him figure out what it is you should be doing?
Right.
And nicely enough, those things tie together very well, that when that opportunity for that promotion comes along, well, you've already shown that you can and are excited about doing the work of that next level up. And you're going to be first on the list.
Yeah.
So I'm going to repeat myself, I think, a bunch of times, and I'm trying not to use this word too many times, but I think the more intentional you are and the deeper the work you do on yourself, right? The Oracle of Delphi, right? We've all heard of this in Greece, right? It's where people used to go to kind of talk to the gods and understand what the gods wanted of them. Above the entrance to the Oracle of Delphi was written, know thyself.
Mm.
And it is just the most important thing. The more you understand yourself and what it is that you want and what it is that you need and why you want to need it, oh my gosh, you not only will be more successful in an externally perspective, but also you're just going to be a bunch happier because you're going to find the things that are meaningful for you.
It's funny because I have told people who have said, like, I don't know what I want. Well,
Mm-hmm.
what do you want to do in your next role?
Yeah.
Right? If we're having a conversation, I think you might be a good fit for this position. So what do you want to do? And it's this kind of like, I don't even know right now. And I think a lot of it has to do with people being exhausted.
Yes,
Because
that's true.
when you're tired, you
Yep.
really don't have creativity for your own life.
Yes.
right? And we see that kind of early on when you're, trying to grind and get through, your the first couple of roles that you have. And then that usually kind of coincides with you building a family, and
Yes.
kids can suck the energy out of
And that
you, right?
sandwich generation where your parents are starting to get
And
older,
then,
they require attention.
and then you wake up one day, you're like, oh, I'm a bit of an empty nester here. Like my kids
Mhm.
are good. Everything is good. And okay, what is it that I want? And a lot of times that question comes when people have been restructured out and they're like,
Yeah.
I just don't know, because I've been doing this for so long at this particular organization that I don't even know what I want. Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a question that I would have for you is, what can people start doing now, before they get to that point where they're like,
Mhm.
having to make that decision, like it's almost forced upon them to start being a little bit more intentional in their
Yeah.
life?
Yeah. I think about this in metaphorically speaking, right? I think it's listening to your heart. Okay. So it's your intuition, whatever. It's not that logical, rational brain. It's this kind of feeling of what is it that I really want? And I think about this in the sense of your ability to listen to that is related to how much you listen to it. Just kind of, again, metaphorically, it's as if your heart speaks to you. But the more you say, shh, be quiet, I'm busy, I'm doing something else, the quieter it's going to get. And what often happens, and I used to work for a consulting firm, and I would go and I would do these training programs for young consultants. And I'm talking people in their early 20s who were some of the most successful people. I mean, ridiculously successful, right? Top university, gold medals, all that stuff, right? Olympic athletes, like they just won all the prizes you can imagine. And they'd get to this point where they'd gotten to the pinnacle for them, many of them, which was working in this place. And they're like, what do I want?
Yeah.
And it's because all that time when their heart said, oh, don't do that, go off and do this, they were like, no, I know the path I want. I got to get that thing. And so be quiet. I think that there's work to be done for all of us in getting better at listening to that voice inside of ourselves. And I'll give you a very silly, perhaps tactical thing that I think is a lot of fun to do to exercise this. But before that, sort of the broader sense of that is all that stuff like journaling, meditation, getting coaching. Sometimes it's useful to engage with someone else who can help you ask those questions and listen to you and validate the fact that it's a useful thing for you to think about. But all the toolkit and all that is well known, right? You don't have to scrape far on the internet to get all those things. All those things I think are really about learning how to listen to yourself. But I'll give you a fun little exercise that you can try today, which is, I don't know, on the weekend, to give yourself a couple of hours and go for a walk. And as you're walking around, try not to make perfectly rational decisions. And what I mean by that is, don't sort of think, okay, I've got to go to that cafe, I'm going to get the coffee, I'm going to do that. No, just walk down the street and try to separate yourself and allow whatever voice that's inside of you that says, let's turn right at the next intersection. Turn right at the next intersection. Even if you know there's nothing down there, just follow that. Because the utility in this is not that you're going to get to some destination that's the right place to be. I'm not saying that some sort of, I don't know, metaphysical idea that if you follow your heart, oh my gosh, there Prince Charming will be standing in the street corner. No, but that it takes training. You have to train your heart to talk to you again. And you do that by listening to it. And so these little kind of micro moments where there's no real cost to doing that. I have a bunch of books. What book should I read? Well, rather than trying to think, okay, what am I trying to achieve? Blah, blah, just reach out and grab a book. Even if it's not the right book, even if it's not going to be, you flip the page, oh my gosh, here's the answer to all my problems. No, not at all. But learning how to choose, learning how to listen, learning how to make decisions for yourself is the thing. It's not necessarily a means to an end. It is the thing. And living with intention, living with that fullness of life that comes from making real decisions about what you do is itself success, even if it doesn't lead to something else.
It's interesting because I will often ask people who are stuck, like, and I think you and I spoke about this a week or two ago, if you were to start a business, I told you had to start a business and you never had to worry about money again, right? But just start a business. What would the business be?
Yeah.
And it's very different from, because I used to ask people, if you won the lottery, what would you do? Right? Like, it wasn't about money, but it was always the same thing. I would travel, pay off my house, pay off my parents. It's always the same thing.
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of times people have been, sometimes people have it right out of the gate. Oh, I know exactly what I would do. But a lot of times people are like, oh my God, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think I would start a nonprofit. A lot of times it's around nonprofits. And I'm like, well, you can look for a job in the nonprofit sector and that could be a really rewarding career. Or you could start by volunteering for a cause that you care very much about. Sure. Right. And I find a lot of times people are like, I want to get on a board. I just want to serve on a board because I know it's going to look good on my resume. It's going to look good on LinkedIn.
Like something else.
Power. Yeah. Versus, do you want to roll up your sleeves and go in, I don't know, rock babies at the Montreal Children's Hospital or, clean cages at the SPCA? Like, if that is the stuff that is going to bring you meaning and you can't find it at work, maybe you can find it in other parts of your life so that you feel
absolutely
whole, right?
Absolutely. And I think for a lot of us, it's just not clear. Right? And I think that if you had perfect clarity around what it is you should be doing with your life, man, it would make everything so much easier. But there's no book out there that's going to give you that perfect clarity. What you need to do is you need to get out there and do stuff, right? And I'm with you. If somebody says, hey, I'd love to work in this nonprofit environment, you think, okay, well, how can I simulate that in a very small scale so that I learn whether that's actually true? And I think the secondary question to someone who says, oh, I really want to work in a nonprofit environment is to say, why? And not in a kind of a doubting sense, but why in the sense of what is the underlying need that working in a nonprofit will satisfy? That's right. And if I can understand that underlying need, often I'll find that actually, so again, if we sort of think about it as kind of a root need, well, that can actually spring out into all sorts of different manifestations. And maybe even at your work, there's a version of something that you can do that is a manifestation of a little bit. It's not perfect. It's not going to be perfect. Yeah. And so it doesn't require you to blow up your whole life and do all this thing. But again, it goes back to this notion, and I'm continuing my metaphor of gardening. It's of understanding what the root of that need is, and then trying to cultivate a little green shoot that, again, isn't the whole thing, but maybe it's the beginning of something that it's at the very least going to teach you more about yourself.
I've come to the conclusion that I think a lot of people are afraid of making changes, and I wonder if that fear was lifted. And we've seen all those quotes. If you didn't ever have to face fear, whether it's starting your business,
you knew you wouldn't fail, what would you do?
Yeah, exactly. But I feel like a lot of times people are, I don't know, is it fear? Like, oh yeah, I really want to do this, but I don't know how, but then they don't prioritize it, right? So, okay, you want to work in a nonprofit or you just want to explore what that looks like. Why don't you start by volunteering? And then there's all these kind of, but I don't have time. And then, So I really like the idea of intention, right? Waking up, it's like, the speed of trust when he talks about, trusting yourself. Like you say, you're going to work out tomorrow, but are you going to work out tomorrow? Because eventually you're not going to believe you're going to work out because you haven't put out your running shoes. You haven't set your alarm. You're going to press snooze. So are you living? It's kind of like hand in hand with how intentional are you being, right? With your time and your energy and the way that you're thinking about, no, tomorrow I'm going to work out. So I'm going to get everything ready ahead of time. So I just wake up, brush my teeth, and let's go, right?
Yeah. But go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I really like this idea of trust, and I think that we talk about intention. Let's talk about attention for a second. If you have this plan that you're going to run every day, and then you don't, well, why not? And what is it? Is it the plan wasn't good? Is it the structure of how that works? I mean, sometimes you can read interesting books and they have tips like lay your running shoes out before you go to sleep, because then, when you wake up in the morning, it's just there and you don't have to find them. And all that stuff is very, very good. But I also think that paying attention to what's getting in the way of this, and maybe the reality is that you actually hate running. And the reason why you are running or you think you should be running is because somebody told you so. And that, I'm not talking about some individual. I mean, just society said running is great and all this kind of thing, but maybe you just don't like running. And maybe if you freed yourself, or if you could get to a better understanding of yourself, you could discover that actually what you really like doing is swimming. But the swimming pool is really far away, or whatever it is. Okay, so what's getting in the way of me swimming? Oh, the schedule is really bad. And as you understand that, and we're all, right? I know the people who sort of tune into your LinkedIn Live, Samantha, are super, super smart, successful folks. You can figure this out.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you got to look at it as something to solve, rather than A, oh, I could never do that, or B, there's something wrong with me. And there's a consequence, this kind of blame flagellation thing. And then I sit down and I eat a whole tub of ice cream because that's what I do.
Or sometimes it's a lack of accountability. Some people need, like I'm the person who would put my alarm on snooze, but then I was like, no, I need to get an online trainer. And so there's no way I'm going to disappoint her by not showing up 3 days a week to do my, It's embarrassing. Yeah. I'm like, wait, oh, I slept in? No, there's none of that. So sometimes it's almost easier. Well, I've let myself down, and you think it's not a big deal. It actually becomes a big deal because then you can't trust yourself to holding your word just for yourself.
Absolutely.
But sometimes having that accountability partner makes a huge difference, right? Whether it's, writing a book or, starting a business. I think those accountability partners are really important. I'm wondering about the misconceptions that people have around finding meaning in and at work. Do you want to touch on that a little bit?
Well, I think we talked about it a little bit. I think that a lot of people think that either A, you can only find meaning in particular types of work, right? So, oh, you're a primary school teacher, elementary school teacher. Well, of course, there's meaning in that. Or you're, you're cleaning at the cages, the SPCA. Well, that person must have lots of meaning in their work. And I think that's completely wrong, right? I think that you can find meaning in all sorts of different things. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody could find meaning in everything. A, it also doesn't mean that it's not harder to find meaning in some contexts than others. B, absolutely, right? And I'm not here to say, oh, there's a lot of structural inequality in our lives, right? And like you're an underpaid worker and all this kind of stuff. You should just, ruck up and find meaning for yourself and don't fight against that structural inequality. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm also very wary of the excuse of I don't work in the right job, so there can't be meaning in what I do. I think that cultivating, again, it's the context. You live in a very arid desert place. There's still some stuff you can grow. Is it as easy to grow stuff there as it would be in tropical Brazil? Well, no, it's not. But you're in this arid desert place. And if you can move to a place where it's much easier to grow things, giddy up, go for it, right? Change jobs, find a job that's closer to that. Great. So I think the first big myth around that is that there's certain occupations or things, and that outside of those, there's no way. Right. And the corollary to that as well, and the thing that I think a lot of people get caught up in is people have these jobs that we would look at as being very meaningful jobs, right? Doctor, nurse, whatever. And some of those people are really unhappy.
Yeah.
Because those things don't work for them. And so the doctor who is like, it's almost harder because if you're in a job where nobody expects you to find meaning, okay, you don't find meaning, big deal. But if you're in a job where it's like, well, of course you have meaning, you're a doctor, and you don't, oh my gosh, like it really feels uncomfortable for those folks.
Right.
So this assumption that there's a particular type of meaning. I think the second thing we talked about is this notion that I'm going to discover meaning, that I'm going to find it, that all of a sudden it's going to come out of nowhere. I think that is something that's very, very difficult. And I think you have to work, again, I'm going to use the term that I like, which is you have to work to cultivate it, right? Context, all that kind of thing. And then I think the third thing is, and this is really for the folks who are listening or HR, that also as an organization, there's nothing I can do. And I don't think that's true either. I think organizations can actually put things in place that help people to cultivate that meaning. Again, regardless of the type of work. Maybe some of the meaning you get from your work is the fact that you work with a group of people who you really like and you want to spend time with them. And I know lots of people who go to work because they're looking forward to seeing their friends. Right. And they work in jobs that the job itself, the actual activity of it, doesn't have some sort of higher societal purpose. We're saving the world, but they just really love the folks that they work with. And a lot of their meaning comes from that.
Yeah.
If I know that to be true as an employer, I can actually create little structures that help that to occur more.
Right.
And it's easy. I mean, pizza party or whatever it is, like all these little things that, again, for some individuals, will really boost that opportunity to cultivate meaning. But for other individuals, will leave them cold. And you got to know the people you're working with.
I remember speaking with somebody who had a special needs child, and they were like, I want a job, and it gets me out of this type of environment, and I'm able to, that's one thing, but my meaning, they found great meaning, being a parent to a child that needed them in a different way. And so, I think not everybody needs to find meaning at work in terms of the actual, the work itself, but meaning, you're right. Yeah. You know what I'm talking about.
Although I would be a bit thoughtful around the way that we define work, because I think that a lot of our concept of work is what I would consider to be more jobs you get paid for, right? Work is something you do because you want an effect from it. And I think by opening that definition of work, we capture a lot of activities that people do that aren't paid, right? And historically, of course, women were very badly treated in this equation because they would do work but not be paid for it. And so when we would talk about work, we wouldn't talk about things like raising children. We wouldn't talk about things like caring for elderly parents or, maintaining a home or things like that, that historically, unfortunately, tended to, and I think even today, tend to fall much more on the shoulders of women than they do on men.
Yeah.
And so there's this devaluation that I actually, when I think about work, I would say that caring for that special needs child is a form of work. It's unpaid, but that doesn't mean it's not meaningful, and it doesn't have this locus of opportunity for you to really get real value out of it and all that kind of thing. I think, and as we think about helping people find meaning in work, I think we have to make sure that we're looking at it in a much broader sense, that we're capturing all of those activities that people are doing that have some productive output, which can be just as much as caring for a home or caring for a child.
Agreed. I just want to, for our audience, please, if you have any questions for Mike, now's the time for you to put it into the chat. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any comments or questions, I don't see anything quite yet. One thing that, you were talking about before, that something that had come to mind too was, OtterBox, and how it's an organization that has really taken the time to get to know their employees. And has even supported startups, right? So employees who said, like, I want to leave because I really want to take a chance and start my own business. And they've sat down with some of these employees to figure out, okay, well, maybe there's a way that we can actually even fund your startup.
Absolutely.
And they've taken some employees back who went off. They did it a year or two later, and they're like, you know what? It's not what I thought it was going to be. And we all know, like, entrepreneurship.
I miss working here. Yeah,
I miss working here. This is what and they've, come on back. So they haven't looked at it as a slight, that what you want to go off and do your own thing and you want to leave us, don't come back. Like, come on, let's see how we can even make your dream a reality, which is, I think, is very cool to have that perspective. Yeah. So no questions just yet. Come
on, folks.
Where is everybody? Come on. They're being, intentional. They're like trying to figure out, like, what's the right question.
Them. Yeah.
So I want to talk about failure a little bit, right? I love this idea of, what we learn from failure. And how do you suggest handling setbacks or failures when trying to live this intentional life?
Yeah, I think, what would I say? I think a couple of different things. There's this quote that's often attributed to Nelson Mandela, which I don't think he ever said, as many quotes are attributed to famous people, but it's a good quote, which is that I never lose, I either win or I learn. And there's something good in that, right? And there's something good in that in the sense that, if we reframe the way we think about failure, and certainly in the kind of startup innovative world, there's this whole notion of fail fast. And I often, when I would talk to organizations, we do a lot of work with organizations to build creativity and culture and stuff like this. We would talk about this notion of, it's not fail fast, it's experiment fast, because failure is this kind of dunk, you failed. Whereas an experiment, if I'm a scientist and I'm trying to figure out, okay, well, how much weight can I put on this pen before it breaks? Well, I try a certain amount of weight, I try a certain more, and then it breaks. I don't think, oh man, I failed.
Right.
No, I learned something. And then I'm going to get another pen and I'll try a little bit less weight and I'm going to try and triangulate down to that thing. if I'm doing that well, I'm learning from failure. The thing that I would say, though, is that there's a bit of this kind of almost fetishization of failure. Like, I have to fail in order to learn. Failure sucks. Right? And let's be honest with ourselves. And I've failed at a lot of things, and a lot of big, difficult things that mean I had to take like a couple years back and restart something and try again and things like that. And it is not pleasant. And so I hesitate around this. Yay, failure is great, and you're going to learn a ton. Learning sometimes comes with its lot of difficulty and pain. And so if I can learn in a way that doesn't require that much pain, that's good. And so to go back to where we were earlier, you're talking about that person who says, hey, I really want to work in a nonprofit environment. Well, how can I experiment with that at a very low cost, low risk way with this sort of iterative process of maybe, you know what, I've got this desire. I'm going to go work at the SPCA. The SPCA is the Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. Wherever you're located, there's probably an organization that does the same. It picks up stray dogs and cats and other animals and helps them to find new homes, that kind of thing. So I really want to work in that organization. I'm going to quit my fancy pants lawyer job and I'm going to go and do that. Well, man, if you do that and then you go into that environment and you realize, whew, this is not what I thought it would be.
Right.
It's going to be very costly from a personal, financial, but also effort basis to get yourself back into that world of law and all these kind of things. And so the question that I would say would be, okay, cool. How do you test that hypothesis?
Mm-hmm.
And is it you go and you volunteer for a day at that SPCA? Is it that you say to your friends, hey, if anybody needs anybody to dog or cat sit for them, I'm the person, I'll do it for free, no problem at all. Like, what are the kind of the micro tests that you can do that over time will help to either confirm or disprove that hypothesis that you had that, oh, this is the job for me.
Right.
And so for me, just to kind of go back to your point, I hesitate around the terminology of fail fast and, you know, failure junkies and all this kind of, failure, it's not pleasant, but experimentation is really the way to discover, I think, some of those things.
I feel though that maybe in tech it's more accepted, right?
Mm-hmm.
In certain sectors it's more acceptable.
Yeah.
I know that people are very guarded when you ask them, you know, like even, you know, talk to me about a big mistake that you made, and what did you learn from that? And then it's very guarded. I don't want to give too much information. I don't want to out myself. But I think, you know, it's Air Transat recently that is fostering this culture of no blame when there's a mistake that's made, right? Which is interesting because then people feel more comfortable to say, to admit to, I've made this mistake or I've had this failure, and for others to kind of support them in the learning that goes along with that. I don't know where the red line is, right, in terms of failure.
Yeah. There's going to be a point at which you sort of say, okay, it is an airline, right? So hopefully that there is a point at which they're saying, no, you know what, actually, that's probably a little bit too much.
Pilot error, hopefully. But but I think it's interesting too, because a lot of times, especially when you have people who are coming up who want to learn from their leaders, and if their leaders look like they don't tolerate mistakes at all, and they're not demonstrating that they've also failed in some way, then where's the transparency and the psychological safety, right?
Well, that's it. And I think that psychological safety, the Amy Edmondson work and all that stuff on that is really, really powerful. And again, we bring some of that research into the book because it is such a crucial component to this. If you don't have that, it's not going to work, right? If you don't have that sense of, I'm not going to be fired if I tell my boss that I screwed something up, then you're either not going to try anything because you're so worried, or if you do screw, you're going to hide it, right? And that's almost more dangerous because then it's going to get worse, right? And I think, you know, in a lot of organizations, the challenge is that balance and just structure that, and use the word. It's such an important word, is fear, right? So many organizations are ruled by fear, and a fear of failing, and a fear of screwing something up, and a fear of people not rewarding you, I guess. I'll give you a very silly example. We work with an organization in my consulting firm that wanted to increase this culture of creativity, this culture of risk-taking in its organization. And they had this annual retreat coming up. And I said, this is great. Let's do a prize for creativity. Just show that we're rewarding this, right?
Right.
In your annual retreat, we've all been to these things, big room, and everybody gets up and there's a stage and people talk and that kind of thing. And they said, oh, fantastic. And we know this perfect example, right? There's this amazingly creative, incredibly dynamic woman named Jane, and she's come up with this new idea and it's actually started a whole new business line, right? Wow, fantastic. Great. Let's celebrate that. Amazing. And I said, okay, good. Let's also find something that didn't work. Because if you just get Jane up there and you tell the story of how amazing and how successful it is, what people are going to hear is, oh, you get rewarded, you get a little prize, you get on stage if you're successful. I said, okay, we're going to take Bob, who had this idea and pushed it, and it cost us $50,000, and then it never worked. And I want you to get Bob up on the stage, and I want you to say, okay, we're going to give Jane her prize, and now we're going to give Bob a prize. And when Bob comes on stage, what I want you to say to him, I want you to say, Bob, what did you learn? And then as an organization, you're saying it's the learning that we care about, not the success.
Right.
There's this crazy, I do this riff sometimes when I'm doing a speech with a bunch of pictures from McDonald's, right? The onion nuggets, never heard of them, right? McPizza, you're younger than I am, but there's a moment at which they had these pizza things going on, right? Mm-hmm. The McDLT, which is like they had this box where the hot side was hot and the cold side was cold, right? And these are all McDonald's products that don't exist anymore. But they invested a ton of money in trying them and building them and things like this. And so, I'll show these different pictures and people laugh because they remember this one, but they don't remember that one. And there's like crazy ideas, whatever. And then I show a picture of Egg McMuffin, right? The Egg McMuffin created breakfast as a fast food category. Nobody went to fast food restaurants for breakfast. I'm not advocating you do that, but nobody went to fast food restaurants for breakfast before somebody invented the Egg McMuffin. But as an organization, you can't say, and I mean, we're talking like, I think it's like 20% of their annual revenue. We're talking billions of dollars, right? Like, I don't know, $8 billion a year is the breakfast category. It was created by somebody having this idea, oh, let's make a little egg sandwich. They saw somebody eating one and they said, oh, I could make one of those on the grill and make a little circle thing. You're not allowed, you can't as an organization say, I just want the winners.
Right. Oh, that's true. That's a great point.
Right. Unless you're doing the McPizza, the McDLT, the onion nuggets, whatever those were, like, unless you're pushing all of these different things, you're not going to get the winner. And so organizations have to learn to accept that you can't just say, I'm only going to do the stuff that's going to work. Mm-hmm. You have to be willing to try all sorts of things and let them actually run a little bit, right? It's not just one day and you're like, oh, this is not going to work. No, push it. Again, iterative processes.
I love that. We need to have another conversation all on failure, because I think it's so important. And I find it so interesting how guarded some people are and how some people do so well in answering that question of, what happened over here, right? Yeah. I was recounting a story the other day of a candidate that we placed who had been fired in one of his roles. And he said, look, he goes, it was my first time as a leader. And he said, we were so busy, I took it all on. I didn't want to ask for help.
Right.
It fell apart like spectacularly, right? Because people weren't getting, clients weren't getting what they were expected to get. And anyway, in this specific industry that he was in. And he said, but what I learned wasn't that I don't want to be a leader again. It was that I need to be able to delegate. Yeah. And I need to be able to ask for help. But I thought being a leader meant I don't ask for help.
Right.
My team asked me for help. He was hired. Our client was like, how can you, he learned from this, right? And he shared what the learning was. It's amazing.
What you want as an employer, I don't necessarily need the truth is that none of us have any idea what the next 5 years of work are going to look like.
That's right.
Like AI, I mean, we haven't talked about this at all, but my gosh, right? Yeah. Like nobody has any idea. I don't need somebody who's really good at this thing. What I need is people who are good at something, but really good at learning new stuff.
That's right. The learning mindset. We've got some questions, by the way. So we've got some people, Johnny, who said very enjoyable and thoughtful conversation. Thank you. Jose said, what would you recommend, or he's asked, what would you recommend for helping our kids find their meaning while securing a nice plan B for their careers? Soccer versus being a doctor, for example.
I mean, that's a great question, Jose. I think that it's a real challenge to try and figure that stuff out. I think that we have to, as parents, be very careful. I mean, look, I hesitate around this, right? Because parenting advice, like, oh my gosh, there is so much of that. The one thing that I would say that is important for me as a parent is empowerment,
Mm.
right? Is giving kids the power to make their own decisions as much as you can. And again, we even get into parenting in the book a little bit, and we talk about this, with little kids. You're not saying, oh, go off, go, here's some money, go do whatever you want, right? We don't live in that society. But if your kid wants to wear a particular clothing, let them make those decisions. And as much as possible, almost to the point where you're kind of scaring yourself a little bit, let them make decisions. Do I tell my kid who wants to be a soccer player, knowing full well that it is so impossibly hard to make a career out of soccer, no, you shouldn't do that? No, but I'm going to be rational, and I'm going to give them a set of facts that I think are true, right? Let's look at the percentage of people, blah, 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 blah. And my own approach to parenting is to be very transparent and honest with my children, and to say, hey, look, I think it's great that you love soccer. My fear would be this. Mm-hmm. So here's what I would suggest, right? Let's do the soccer like this. And then maybe, is there something else that you like? What's the next thing you like as much? And how do you kind of build this potential other secondary career if the soccer doesn't work out?
Right.
At the same time, I have a friend of mine who was so madly, and soccer is a good example. He was so mad. I mean, this guy was soccer crazy, played actually university, NCAA soccer in the US, and never made it past that, right? So the first 23, 24 years of his life were really focused on soccer. And then at that point, he knew that was it. And then he switched around, and he's a really, really successful finance guy now.
Right.
And what happened is that all that discipline, the strength, the kind of all the drive, all that stuff that he had built by playing soccer became very useful in him reinventing himself in this other thing.
Yeah.
Right? And so again, you got to play it your way, and you got to play with your kids the way you can. But I would personally, I aim more on the empowering side than on the nudging, pushing, encouraging our kids to do particular things side.
It's interesting because I've met a number of highly skilled professionals, certainly out of Quebec, who got a scholarship, a sports scholarship. Oftentimes it was hockey, and blew out their knee, right? Yeah. And they learned English playing for the US, and but
one of mine went to Harvard.
Right. Yeah. But the thing is, they had a degree to fall back on, right? Yes. I remember my eldest now, when she was little, she wanted to work at McDonald's, and she had this idea that she'd wear roller skates actually at McDonald's, like an orange julep meets.
Right on, yeah.
And she's like, I want to be able to make French fries at McDonald's. And I was like, well, why don't you, she goes, I don't think I need to go to school later on, Mom. Like, she was a little kid, right? And I said, well, if you go on to university and you get a degree, then maybe you can own a McDonald's, and you don't just have to make the fries. You can make the fries and the burgers, and you can serve the customers and count the cash, right? So it's just kind of a little bit younger, but this idea of certainly having something to fall back on, right, becomes very important. Yvonne said, love the idea of micro tests. So that really, that was great. Andre, great conversation, feels very spacious to think of work, dignity, motivation, and meaning through your perspective. So thanks a lot.
Okay. And I love dignity in this, right? To me, it's such an important component of this. Sorry, just to riff on that for a second.
Yeah.
Dignified work. Like, in our society, we have these almost strata of, oh, that work has dignity and that doesn't. And I remember being in a restaurant, actually, I was in Tokyo, and I was in a restaurant, and I watched the sushi chefs, and sushi chef in Tokyo is like, it's an amazingly very dignified, very honorable profession. And I watched them interacting with the guy who washed the dishes. And you could tell in that interaction that there was a mutual respect, that the dishwasher respected the sushi chef, but in turn, the sushi chef respected the dishwasher, even though a dishwasher is much lower on the kind of hierarchical structure. But that person carried themselves with dignity, and they did their work with dignity. And there's a beautiful movie, actually, if you haven't seen it, called Perfect Days, which is about a guy who cleans toilets in Tokyo. So it just came out last year, I think. And it's a really good testament to this notion that this guy's a toilet cleaner in Tokyo, but you can tell that he approaches his work with dignity. And I'm not saying that, oh, it's your responsibility to find dignity in some awful job that you have because you were locked out of education for various reasons and you come from a lack of privilege and all these. No, I'm not saying that. It's not this kind of responsibilization, right? I have a big problem with that. At the same time, though, I think you are in the context you are. And given that context, what are the choices that you can make? both to fight against that structural inequality, but also in an individual sense to kind of create a sense of dignity for yourself. So
that's wonderful. We have one last question from Loic, and we're coming to the top of the hour on the topic of failure. How does one cultivate a resilient mindset, in the face of challenges and setbacks? Specifically, what is the role of debriefing sessions after key incidents, and how should those be done?
Yeah, and I promise is the last plug. We talk about this in the book. In the Army, they had this notion called after action review, which is like after something happens, let's talk about it. Again, it goes back to your point, Sam, learning mindset, growth mindset, these ideas that just because I screwed that up doesn't mean it'll happen again. And if you take it from that as a leader in an organization, but as an individual as well, if you take it from that learning, what is it that I'm going to gain from this? You can reframe those challenges and setbacks as opportunities for growth. Now, again, I'm not saying, hey, failure, right? Failure sucks. I know it does. And setbacks suck. But a lot of, at least for me and a lot of the people that I know, when you look backwards, we started with Steve Jobs, right? You look backwards in your past and you say, if I hadn't messed that up, I wouldn't get to where I am. And so while you're in it, it's, God forbid you tell your friends, oh, don't worry, this is going to be great. You're going to look back on this and laugh. Nobody wants to hear that.
Yeah.
But in the large sweep of things, you can accelerate the benefit of those experiences by going through, as you say, Loic, this notion of like a structured debrief, of being intentional around how am I going to learn and incorporate the learnings from this?
I love that. Mike, we're out of time. You're amazing. Thank you so much. Again, for those of you who are interested, you can pick up a copy of...
Well, now that you bought that one, I don't know if there's any left. So
we bought Mike's book, Intention. And Mike, you've been really phenomenal. So thank you very, very much for your time.
I appreciate you having me on.
And your insights today. Thanks
for everybody for the questions. They're really good.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Have a great day.